The human vessel Perseverance was nothing more than scrap metal drifting through the void when our patrol ships first detected it in the Kepler 442 system. A broken-down cargo hauler, ancient by any civilized species standards, leaking atmosphere and running on emergency power. By all rights, whoever was aboard should have been dead days ago. The fact that a single life sign still registered on our sensors was remarkable enough to warrant investigation. What we discovered aboard the derelict ship would fundamentally alter our understanding of what it means to be human, and, more importantly, what it means to survive in a universe that seems bent on destroying everything we hold dear. The pilot we found inside was barely conscious when our rescue teams breached the hull. Marcus Chen, age 34, former Earth Colonial Navy engineer turned independent freight runner. His ship's life support had been failing for 6 days. The water recycling system had collapsed completely 3 days prior. Food stores had been exhausted for over a week. By every metric our medical teams could calculate, he should have died of dehydration alone 48 hours before we found him. Yet there he was, conscious enough to wave off medical assistance and insist on personally overseeing the transfer of his cargo manifest. The cargo itself was unremarkable agricultural supplies bound for the frontier colony of New Mozambique. Standard protein supplements, water purification tablets, basic farming equipment. Nothing that would explain why a man would push himself and his ship to the absolute breaking point just to make a delivery that was already 3 weeks overdue. Nothing that would justify the kind of stubborn determination that kept Marcus Chen alive when every law of biology said he should be dead. But it wasn't the cargo that caught our attention. It was the modifications Chen had made to his ship during those final days. With his vessel dying around him, systems failing one by one, this human had done something unprecedented in the known galaxy. Instead of accepting defeat, he had begun cannibalizing non-essential systems to keep the critical ones running. The waste heat from the failing reactor? Redirected through a makeshift grid to provide minimal life support to a single compartment. The backup communications array? Stripped down and rewired to extend navigation sensors just enough to detect approaching vessels. Even the ship's artificial gravity generator had been partially dismantled, its components repurposed to maintain minimal structural integrity as hull breaches spread throughout the vessel. What struck our engineers as they examined the modifications wasn't their elegance, they were crude, desperate measures that violated every safety protocol in the Galactic Engineering Manual. What struck them was the methodical precision with which they had been implemented. Each modification built upon the last, creating a cascading system of redundancies and failsafes that kept Marcus Chen alive hours longer than should have been possible. He had essentially rebuilt his dying ship into a life support cocoon, sacrificing everything else to maintain the bare minimum needed for survival. The first indication that we were dealing with something truly extraordinary came during Chen's medical evaluation aboard our flagship. Dr. Velixis, our chief xenobiologist, had seen representatives of over 200 species during her career. She had studied the extreme survival adaptations of the crystalline Zektar, who could enter metabolic stasis for decades. She had documented the remarkable resilience of the aquatic nereids, who could survive in hard vacuum for limited periods. But she had never seen anything like the physiological state Marcus Chen was in when we found him. His body had entered a form of adaptive crisis mode that seemed to blur the line between conscious decision-making and autonomous biological response. Kidney function had slowed to preserve what little water remained in his system. Metabolic rate had decreased by nearly 40%, allowing his body to extract maximum energy from the emergency rations he'd been rationing for weeks. Most remarkably, his brain chemistry had shifted to maintain cognitive function even as dehydration reached levels that should have induced hallucinations and organ failure. When Dr. Velixis shared her initial findings with the medical staff, the general consensus was that they were dealing with some form of genetic modification or cybernetic enhancement. Humans, after all, were a relatively new species on the galactic stage. Their homeworld had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 generations ago. Perhaps their colonial expansion had involved experimental augmentation programs that the Galactic Federation wasn't aware of. But genetic scans revealed nothing unusual. No enhancement markers, no foreign DNA, no cybernetic implants beyond a standard colonial identification chip. Marcus Chen was, by every measurable standard, an entirely baseline human. The extraordinary survival capabilities he had demonstrated were simply what an unmodified human being was capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. This realization sent shockwaves through the Federation's xenobiological research community. For decades, humans had been classified as a Class 3 sapient species, intelligent, adaptable, but physically unremarkable compared to most galactic civilizations. Their technological advancement was impressive given their recent emergence, but their biological capabilities seemed limited. They lacked the natural armor of the Corvan, the extended lifespans of the Elysians, the psionic abilities of the Mentari. They were considered useful allies and trading partners, but not particularly noteworthy from a survival standpoint. Marcus Chen's case forced a complete re-evaluation of that assessment. The interrogation sessions began as routine debriefing procedures. Chen was cooperative, even grateful for the rescue. He answered questions about his cargo run, his ship's mechanical failures, and the desperate jury-rigging that had kept him alive. But, as the questioning continued, patterns began to emerge that painted a picture of a species with survival instincts unlike anything the Federation had previously encountered. When asked why he hadn't activated his ship's emergency beacon earlier, Chen explained that he hadn't wanted to risk other vessels attempting a rescue in the dangerous asteroid field where his ship had broken down. When asked why he hadn't jettisoned the cargo to reduce mass and extend his supplies, he said he had given his word to deliver it, and that the colony was depending on those supplies to survive their harsh winter season. When asked why he hadn't simply accepted that his situation was hopeless and activated the emergency termination protocol that would have ended his suffering, he looked genuinely confused by the question. "I wasn't dead yet," he said, as if this simple statement explained everything. Further interviews revealed that Chen's response was not unusual among humans. The concept of accepting inevitable defeat, of surrendering to overwhelming odds, seemed to be fundamentally foreign to their species' psychology. Even when presented with mathematical certainty of failure, humans consistently chose to continue fighting, to keep searching for alternatives, to maintain hope in situations where hope was statistically meaningless. Dr. Kthara, our chief behavioral psychologist, theorized that this might be an evolutionary adaptation from humanity's homeworld. Earth was a notoriously hostile planet by galactic standards, frequent natural disasters, extreme weather patterns, a biosphere filled with predators and diseases that had consistently pushed early human development to the brink of extinction. Perhaps this relentless optimism in the face of impossible odds was simply how the species had managed to survive long enough to develop civilization. But, the more we studied Marcus Chen, the more we realized that we weren't just looking at an evolutionary quirk. We were looking at something that had profound implications for galactic security. The hegemony war had been raging for almost a decade when we found the Perseverance. The Corvan hegemony, with their advanced military technology and ruthless expansion doctrine, had been steadily conquering Federation worlds along the Outer Rim. Their strategy was simple and brutally effective, overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively, designed to break enemy morale before serious resistance could be organized. It had worked against the Elysians, whose long lifespans made them naturally cautious about engaging in costly conflicts. It had worked against the Zekdar, whose crystalline physiology made them vulnerable to specific frequency weapons the hegemony had developed. It had worked against every species they had encountered. But it hadn't worked against the humans. Human colonies under hegemony attack displayed the same incomprehensible refusal to surrender that Marcus Chen had shown aboard his dying ship. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, when orbital bombardments had reduced their cities to rubble and their populations to scattered refugees, human resistance continued. Guerrilla fighters emerged from the ruins to harass hegemony supply lines. Civilian populations organized underground networks to support continued military operations. Children as young as 12 were documented performing sabotage missions against hegemony installations. The hegemony's psychological warfare tactics, so effective against other species, seemed to have the opposite effect on humans. Demonstrations of hegemony power designed to demoralize civilian populations instead generated increased resistance. Propaganda broadcasts meant to convince humans of the futility of continued fighting were met with mockery and defiance. Even hegemony terror weapons, designed to break the will to fight through sheer horror, only seemed to make human resistance more determined. General Voskthek, supreme commander of hegemony forces, had begun referring to human-controlled systems as the bleeding zones. Even successful conquests of human worlds required such disproportionate resources and resulted in such ongoing insurgency problems that they were often net losses for the hegemony war effort. Planets that should have been pacified within weeks continued to resist for months or years, tying up hegemony forces that were desperately needed elsewhere. The Federation's Strategic Analysis Division had been struggling to understand this phenomenon. Human military technology was advanced but not superior to hegemony weapons. Human tactics were innovative but not revolutionary. Human soldiers were brave but no more so than other Federation species who had been defeated by the hegemony. What made humans different? Marcus Chen's case provided the answer. It wasn't about technology or tactics or even courage. It was about a fundamental inability to accept defeat that seemed to be hardwired into human psychology at a species level. Humans didn't fight harder because they were more strategic or better equipped. They fought harder because they literally could not conceive of stopping as long as any possibility of victory remained, no matter how remote. The implications of this realization extended far beyond the current war. If humans possessed this level of psychological resilience as a baseline trait, what would happen as their civilization continued to advance? As their technology improved and their population expanded, would this relentless determination make them natural leaders in galactic affairs? Or would it make them a threat to the stability that the Federation had worked so hard to maintain? Dr. Velixis's continued medical studies of Chen revealed additional disturbing possibilities. The adaptive physiological responses she had documented weren't just temporary survival mechanisms. Follow-up examinations showed that many of the changes to his metabolism and neural chemistry had become permanent. His body had essentially learned how to function more efficiently under extreme stress, and those lessons had been retained even after he returned to normal conditions. More importantly, Chen reported that the experience had changed his psychological outlook in ways that he struggled to describe. He felt more confident in his ability to handle future crises, more willing to take risks that he previously would have considered too dangerous, more optimistic about outcomes even when objective analysis suggested pessimism was warranted. The near-death experience hadn't traumatized him, it had empowered him. If this pattern held true for other humans, it suggested that exposure to extreme adversity didn't weaken the species, it strengthened them. Each crisis survived, each impossible challenge overcome, each moment where death seemed certain but was somehow avoided, would create humans who were more capable of surviving the next crisis. It was a form of psychological evolution that could compound over time, creating individuals and, eventually entire populations that were increasingly resistant to the kind of pressures that had historically kept galactic civilization stable and predictable. The Federation Council's emergency session convened 6 weeks after Chen's rescue. Representatives from 47 member species gathered to discuss what was being called the human question. The debate was unprecedented in Federation history. Never before had the Council been forced to consider whether a member species might be too successful for the good of galactic stability. Ambassador Telnara of the Elysians argued for immediate restrictions on human expansion and military development. Her species had lived through countless galactic conflicts over their 1,000-year lifespans, and they recognized the patterns that led to galactic wars. A species that could not be defeated through conventional means was a species that would inevitably become aggressive, simply because they would have no reason to fear the consequences of their actions. Counselor Vex of the Mentari took the opposite position. The psionic abilities of his species allowed him to sense the underlying motivations of other sapiens, and he insisted that humans showed no signs of inherent aggression or expansionist tendencies. Their resistance to the hegemony was defensive in nature, driven by a desire to protect their colonies and allies rather than conquer new territory. The debate raged for days, with species after species weighing in on whether humans represented an opportunity or a threat. Some argued that their unusual resilience made them ideal shock troops for Federation military operations. Others worried that their inability to accept defeat would make them impossible to negotiate with if they ever became adversaries. A few suggested that the Federation should begin developing contingency plans for containing human expansion before it became a problem. But it was Dr. Kthara's final report that truly shifted the discussion. Her team had conducted extensive psychological profiles of not just Marcus Chen, but of hundreds of other humans throughout Federation space. The results were consistent and disturbing. Every human they tested showed the same fundamental inability to accept defeat, the same willingness to continue fighting in hopeless situations, the same tendency to become stronger rather than weaker when exposed to extreme adversity. More importantly, they discovered that these traits were not static. Humans who had survived significant challenges showed enhanced versions of these characteristics. Veterans of the Hegemony War demonstrated even greater resilience than civilian populations. Colonists who had survived harsh frontier conditions were more adaptable than those from more comfortable core worlds. It was as if the species was actively evolving, becoming more formidable with each generation that faced serious challenges. The report's conclusion was stark: humanity was not just surviving the Hegemony War, they were being strengthened by it. Every battle fought, every colony defended, every impossible victory achieved was creating a population that would be even more capable of surviving future conflicts. The Federation was watching the birth of what might become the galaxy's most dominant military force, forged not through conquest but through an endless series of defensive victories against overwhelming odds. The final debate session was held in closed chambers, with only the Federation Council's core leadership present. The question on the table was simple: should humanity be formally recognized as a potential threat to galactic stability, with all the military and political preparations that such recognition would entail? Admiral HFY of the Andromedans, whose species had fought 3 galactic wars over the past millennium, made the case for immediate action. "We have seen this pattern before," he argued. A species develops unusual military advantages, whether through technology, biology, or psychology. Initially, they use those advantages defensively, to protect themselves and their allies. But, eventually, inevitably, they begin to see those same allies as potential threats. They start to believe that the only way to ensure their security is to dominate or eliminate all potential opposition. We cannot wait for humans to reach that conclusion. But, it was Admiral Clara herself who delivered the most compelling argument against preemptive action. "We are debating whether to fear humans because they refuse to surrender," she said. "But, consider what that means. Every species in this chamber has, at some point in our history, been forced to accept defeat. We have learned when to negotiate, when to compromise, when to withdraw. We see this as wisdom, as the foundation of galactic diplomacy. But, what if we are wrong? What if the willingness to accept defeat is not wisdom but weakness? What if the only reason we have not achieved more, not protected our people better, not built a more just galaxy, is because we were too quick to accept that our goals were impossible?" The session ended without a formal resolution, but the underlying consensus was clear. The Federation would continue to work with humanity as allies, but contingency plans would be developed. Military analysts would study human tactics and psychology. Diplomatic protocols would be adjusted to account for their unusual negotiating patterns. Research would be conducted into weapons and strategies that might be effective against opponents who refuse to surrender. Marcus Chen was eventually released with full honors and a commendation for his service to galactic commerce. He was offered positions with several major Federation shipping corporations, all eager to employ someone with his demonstrated survival skills. He declined them all, choosing instead to repair the Perseverance and return to independent freight running. When asked why he would choose to risk another potentially fatal equipment failure, his response was typical of his species: "The colonies still need supplies, and I gave my word." 6 months after his rescue, Chen departed Federation space aboard his refurbished vessel, carrying a new cargo of medical supplies to frontier settlements in the disputed zone between Federation and Hegemony territory. Intelligence reports indicate that he has successfully completed 14 runs into contested space, often delivering supplies to colonies that other freighter captains consider too dangerous to approach. On 3 occasions, he has been fired upon by Hegemony patrol ships. Each time, he has somehow managed to evade capture and complete his delivery. The Federation's xenobiological research programs have since expanded to include comprehensive studies of human physiology and psychology. Dr. Velixis has published 17 papers on human adaptive responses, each one revealing new aspects of their extraordinary survival capabilities. Her latest research suggests that humans may be capable of generational learning, passing survival adaptations to their children not through genetics but through cultural and psychological mechanisms that remain poorly understood. Dr. Ktharov's behavioral studies have identified over 40 distinct psychological traits that appear to be universal among humans, all related to their refusal to accept defeat. These include an unusual ability to maintain optimism in statistically hopeless situations, a tendency to view setbacks as temporary challenges rather than permanent failures, and a remarkable capacity to find meaning and motivation in suffering that would break most other species. But, perhaps most significantly, her research has revealed that these traits are not diminished by success or comfort. Humans who live in safe, prosperous circumstances maintain the same psychological resilience as those who face daily survival challenges. It appears to be a permanent aspect of their species' character, not simply an adaptation to harsh conditions. The war with the hegemony ended 18 months after Marcus Chen's rescue, but not through any decisive military victory. Instead, the hegemony's expansion ground to a halt as they found themselves unable to absorb the resources required to maintain control over human-populated systems. The constant insurgencies, the endless resistance operations, the simple refusal of human populations to accept conquest, had proven more effective than any weapon the Federation possessed. Hegemony forces began withdrawing from human systems not because they had been defeated in battle, but because occupying those systems had become economically and militarily unsustainable. For the first time in their recorded history, the hegemony had encountered an enemy they could not break through the application of superior force. General Kthek's final military report on the human resistance made for sobering reading. "The humans cannot be conquered," he wrote, "because they do not understand that they have been defeated. They continue to fight in situations where any rational opponent would surrender, and they somehow find ways to win battles that should be mathematically impossible. They have turned our greatest strength, our ability to break enemy morale, into our greatest weakness." The report concluded with a recommendation that the hegemony avoid further contact with human-controlled space until more effective strategies could be developed. It was, in effect, an admission that one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces had been defeated not by superior technology or tactics, but by simple human stubbornness. The Galactic Federation's post-war analysis painted an even more striking picture. In every major engagement of the war, human forces had been outnumbered, outgunned, and operating with inferior technology. By every conventional measure, they should have been crushed in the first months of the conflict. Instead, they had not only survived but had imposed such costs on the hegemony that continued expansion became impossible. The key to their success hadn't been brilliant strategy or heroic leadership, though both had played important roles. It had been the simple fact that human soldiers, civilians, and leaders had refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. They had continued fighting when defeat was certain, continued hoping when hope was irrational, continued believing in victory when victory was mathematically impossible. And, somehow, through that refusal to accept reality, they had changed reality itself. The current state of human civilization reflects this extraordinary resilience. 3 years after the war's end, human colonies have not only rebuilt from the devastation of hegemony attacks, they have expanded. New settlements have been established in systems that other species consider uninhabitable. Trade networks have been extended into regions of space that were previously thought too dangerous for commercial operations. Human explorers have pushed into uncharted territories that no other Federation species has dared to enter. More concerning from a strategic standpoint is the way human military doctrine has evolved. Where other species develop strategies based on achieving quick, decisive victories with minimal casualties, humans have embraced what they call asymmetric persistence. Their military academies now teach courses on tactical stubbornness and strategic refusal. Their officers are trained to view every apparent defeat as a temporary setback and every tactical withdrawal as an opportunity to regroup for another assault. The psychological profiles of human military leaders reveal a mindset that Federation analysts struggle to categorize. They plan for battles they expect to lose, develop strategies that assume catastrophic setbacks, and maintain logistics systems designed to continue operations even after command structures have been destroyed. It is military planning based not on the assumption of victory, but on the assumption that defeat can always be temporary if you refuse to accept it. Perhaps most remarkably, this mindset appears to be spreading beyond military applications. Human scientists undertake research projects that other species would consider hopeless, pursuing solutions to problems that have been deemed unsolvable for centuries. Human engineers design systems that operate under conditions that should make them impossible to maintain. Human explorers venture into regions of space where the probability of survival is so low that other species classify such missions as suicide. And they succeed far more often than statistical analysis suggests they should. Dr. Velixis's latest research has identified what she believes to be the biological mechanism behind this phenomenon. Human neural chemistry appears to respond to extreme stress by increasing production of compounds that enhance pattern recognition and creative problem solving while simultaneously reducing the impact of fear and despair on decision-making processes. The result is a species that literally becomes more intelligent and more capable when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. This discovery has prompted significant debate within the Federation's scientific community. If humans become more capable under extreme stress, does that mean that challenging them actually makes them more dangerous? Should the Federation be working to make human lives easier and more comfortable, or would that simply weaken a valuable ally? And, most disturbingly, if humans continue to face and overcome impossible challenges, what will they become in 100 years? 1,000? The answers to these questions may have already begun to emerge. Recent reports from Federation intelligence services describe human activities that suggest their capabilities may be expanding beyond what was previously observed. Human traders have established profitable operations in regions of space where radiation levels should be lethal to biological life. Human colonists have successfully established settlements on planets where the atmospheric composition should make human survival impossible. Human researchers have announced breakthroughs in theoretical physics that Federation scientists insist should be mathematically impossible. Each of these achievements follows the same pattern: humans encounter a problem that appears to have no solution, refuse to accept that the problem is unsolvable, and somehow find a way to succeed despite overwhelming evidence that success should be impossible. It is as if the species has learned to treat the word impossible as merely another challenge to overcome. The Federation Council's recent classified discussions have focused increasingly on what historians are already calling the human paradox. How does a civilization maintain stable relationships with allies who are becoming progressively more capable with each passing year? How do you negotiate with a species that refuses to accept defeat even when defeat would be in their best interests? How do you plan for the future when one of your key allies may be evolving into something unprecedented in galactic history? These questions have become more urgent as reports continue to arrive of human achievements that challenge the Federation's understanding of what should be possible. The successful colonization of the Proxima Centauri system, where radiation from the star's solar flares should make biological life impossible. The establishment of profitable mining operations in the gravitational chaos of the Kepler 442 asteroid belt, where no other species has managed to maintain equipment for more than a few days. The development of new faster-than-light communication protocols that allow near-instantaneous contact across distances that should create insurmountable time delays. In each case, human engineers and scientists have approached problems that the rest of the galaxy had classified as unsolvable and somehow found solutions. More importantly, their solutions often work in ways that Federation science cannot fully explain. The technologies they develop frequently operate on principles that violate established physical laws, yet they work consistently and reliably. Dr. Ktharata's psychological studies suggest an explanation for this phenomenon. Humans appear to approach problem solving with a fundamentally different methodology than other sapient species. Where most civilizations begin with established scientific principles and work within those constraints to develop solutions, humans seem to start with the desired outcome and work backward, developing new principles if necessary to achieve their goals. This reverse engineering approach to reality itself may be the key to understanding human exceptionalism. They do not accept that physical laws are immutable constraints, they treat them as challenges to be overcome. They do not view scientific impossibility as a final answer, they see it as the starting point for investigation. They have essentially turned the scientific method into a tool for achieving the impossible. The implications of this realization extend far beyond questions of technology or military strategy. If humans can systematically overcome limitations that other species accept as absolute, what does that mean for the future of galactic civilization? Will humanity eventually solve problems that have plagued the galaxy for millennia, or will their refusal to accept limitations eventually destabilize the carefully balanced systems that maintain galactic peace? Marcus Chen's case remains the foundation for all Federation research into human exceptionalism. His survival aboard the dying Perseverance demonstrated the species' extraordinary individual resilience, but subsequent events have shown that this resilience scales to encompass their entire civilization. The same psychological and physiological adaptations that kept one man alive in a failing spaceship have allowed an entire species to thrive in a universe that seems designed to destroy them. The title of this report, "The Man Who Destroys His Weak Self Can Never Be Destroyed by Others," comes from an ancient human philosophical text that Chen was found reading during his medical recovery. When asked to explain its meaning, his response was characteristically human: "It means that the only real enemy is giving up. Everything else is just another problem to solve." This simple statement may represent the most profound insight into human psychology that Federation science has achieved. For humans, weakness is not an external condition imposed by circumstances, it is an internal choice to accept defeat. By refusing to make that choice, by systematically destroying their own willingness to surrender, they have made themselves effectively indestructible. The question facing the Federation is whether this indestructibility will ultimately prove to be humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization, or its greatest threat. The answer may determine the course of galactic history for millennia to come. As I compile this report, new intelligence arrives daily documenting human achievements that continue to push the boundaries of what the Federation considers possible. Yesterday's impossible breakthrough becomes tomorrow's standard human engineering practice. Problems that have stymied galactic science for centuries are solved by human researchers who simply refuse to accept that solutions don't exist. We are witnessing the emergence of a species that treats impossibility as merely another engineering challenge. The implications of this development, for science, for military strategy, for galactic diplomacy, for the very nature of what it means to be sapient in this universe, are still being evaluated. What is clear is that humanity represents something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that cannot be destroyed because it refuses to understand that destruction is possible. Whether this proves to be the salvation of galactic civilization or its greatest challenge remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the universe will never be the same again. End report. Security classification, ultra-restricted distribution, Federation Council Executive Committee only authorization, Admiral ZEPH Kthara, Strategic Intelligence Division. The humans have taught us something that we had forgotten in our millennia of galactic civilization, that the word impossible is not a description of reality, it is a failure of imagination. Whether we are prepared for a universe where imagination has no limits remains to be seen. Final personal note: Admiral ZEPH Kthara.